I was reaching for my water glass when Denise reached across the table and turned my dinner plate a quarter turn. The way you'd square up a place setting nobody was going to use. "A military woman doesn't belong at the head of this family," she said, loud enough that the chandelier could have heard it, loud enough that there was no version of tonight where she could later call it a joke. The room went. Still in that particular way, rooms go still, right? Before something breaks, my stepbrother. Colton had his phone up before she'd finished the sentence. Already angled for the good light, already grinning like a man who'd been handed the punchline to a joke he'd been rehearsing for years. My father looked at his wineglass. Not at me. At his wineglass, like it had suddenly become the most interesting object in the state of Ohio. I had been in that dining room for exactly 11 minutes. 3 days before that, I had been standing on a runway in Kuwait, watching a C-17 fold the last 13 months of my life into a duffel bag, and I had made harder calls than this one, in less time than it took Denise to inhale before her next sentence. I had signed off on convoy routes that decided whether soldiers came home. I had sat across from colonels twice my rank and told them calmly that their plan had a flaw in it, and I had been right, and I had said it in a voice that never once shook. What I had not prepared for, apparently, was a dining room in my father's house, and a woman in a cardigan, the color of wet concrete, telling me I didn't belong at my own family's table. I set my water glass down. Without letting it clink against the wood, I smiled. Not the tight, apologetic smile people expect from a woman who's just been humiliated in front of her whole family, but something calmer, something with no give in it at all. The kind of smile that had once made a battalion commander sit up straighter in a briefing room. "You have no idea what you just did," I said. And I meant every word of it, literally. Then I stood, folded my napkin into a neat rectangle, and set it beside my untouched plate. And I want to tell you exactly how we got to that dining room, and exactly what happened after. Because by the time this story ends, one of us is going to be sitting in a courtroom. And it is not going to be me. My name is Major Erin Castillo. I am a logistics officer in the United States Army, and for 11 months, I had been running the supply chain for a battalion that never stopped needing things. Fuel, water, ammunition, spare parts for vehicles that broke down in sand, that seemed engineered specifically to destroy them. I had learned to sleep in 90-minute increments. I'd learned to make decisions that mattered inside of 2 minutes, with incomplete information, knowing that getting it wrong meant somebody's convoy sat exposed on a road it shouldn't have been on. I had learned to walk into rooms full of men who outranked me and tell them the truth even when the truth was inconvenient, because in my experience the truth delivered late costs more than the truth delivered plainly. What I had never learned, what nobody in 31 years of life had ever managed to teach me, was how to walk into my father's house and be wanted there. There's a night from that deployment I still think about more than almost any other, not because it was the most dangerous, but because it's the one that taught me the most about the shape of my own composure. We'd lost contact with a fuel convoy for 40 minutes on a route that had seen an IED strike 2 weeks earlier, and I remember standing in the command tent watching the radio operator's face go pale, watching 2 majors senior to me start talking over each other about whether to scramble a quick reaction force before we'd even confirmed there was anything to react to. I remember the specific stillness that came over me in that moment. Not calm exactly. Calm implies an absence of feeling, and I felt plenty. It was something more like clarity, a narrowing of the world down to the only questions that actually mattered. Where were they last confirmed? What was the terrain between there and here? What was the actual evidence-based likelihood of a communications failure versus something worse? I asked those 3 questions out loud in that order, and the room quieted enough to actually answer them. And it turned out the convoy had simply lost a radio antenna to a pothole and pulled off to make field repairs. Exactly the kind of unglamorous, non-catastrophic explanation that never makes it into the stories people tell about deployments, but makes up the overwhelming majority of what actually happens on any given night. Nobody thanked me for that. That's not how it works. You don't get medals for the crises that don't happen because someone kept their head clear enough to ask the right 3 questions in the right order. You just go back to your cot, and you lie there for a while listening to your own pulse gradually slow back down, and you understand in a way that's hard to explain to people who've never had to do it. That the calm everyone saw on your face during those 40 minutes cost you something real, even if nobody else in the tent ever knew the price. I think about that night now because it taught me something I carried straight into my father's dining room without ever fully realizing I was carrying it. That the stillness other people read as strength is very rarely the absence of fear. It's usually just fear, disciplined into something useful instead of something that runs the show. My father, Thomas Castillo, called me the week before I flew home. His voice had that specific brand of warmth he saved for occasions, the same warmth I'd heard at my college graduation, the same warmth I'd heard the day I pinned on my captain's bars. It is a warmth that requires an audience to exist. I have never once heard my father use that voice on the phone, with just the two of us on the line, and it took me until I was almost 30 to understand what that meant. "We're doing a family dinner, Erin," he said. "Everyone wants to see you." I should have caught the word everyone. I didn't, not fully, not the way I'd have caught a discrepancy in a manifest or a gap in a convoy schedule. Some part of me, some part that apparently never fully leaves you no matter how many deployments you survive, still wanted to believe everyone meant us. The three of us, the family I remembered from before. But everyone now included Denise, my father's wife of 5 years, and Colton, her 27-year-old son from a previous marriage, a young man who had never held a job longer than 9 months and referred to himself as a digital entrepreneur, the way some people call themselves poets, as a way of avoiding the word. Unemployed, I bought gifts anyway. A watch for my father, the kind he'd circled in a catalogue years before I ever left for basic training. The kind I had never forgotten, because some part of me had been waiting for the right moment to give it to him ever since. A leather portfolio for Colton, because I still believed, foolishly, that decency could be modelled instead of demanded. And for Denise, a set of hand-painted ceramic mugs from a market in Doha, chosen with more care than she probably imagined I was capable of. I have always believed that showing up with open hands says something a person can't argue with. I was wrong about that too, as it turned out. Some people don't want your open hands. They want your empty chair. My mother, Grace, has been gone 11 years now. The grief has softened over time into something closer to weather than wound. A system that moves through on certain days and then moves on, leaving the rest of the year mostly clear. She died when I was 23, barely out of my officer training, and I remember standing at her graveside in my dress uniform thinking, that grief was supposed to feel like drowning, and instead it felt like the volume on the whole world had been turned down by half. My father remarried within 2 years. I understood it the way children understand their parents without ever being told outright. He needed a version of the story where he had moved on cleanly, where nothing from his first marriage still had a hand on his life. I let him have that story. I stepped back. I visited on holidays, sent cards, kept my distance the way you keep distance from a stove you already know is hot, and I told myself that was maturity instead of avoidance. The house looked the same as it always had when I pulled into the driveway that October evening. Pale blue siding, the porch light my mother had picked out before she died, the oak tree in the side yard that I used to climb until my father told me girls shouldn't be up in trees. I walked up that porch with a box of gifts and a duffel bag that still smelled faintly of jet fuel, and I told myself this would be fine. Family is family, I told myself. That sentence has never once been simple, and it wasn't that night either. Denise opened the door with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "Erin," she said, like my name was something she'd had to rehearse. Colton was in the living room, feet on the coffee table, phone already in his hand. Though nothing had happened yet, a detail I would only understand the full weight of much later. My father hugged me the way he always did. Quick, a little stiff, a man who loved his daughter and had never quite learned how to show it without an apology, built into the gesture. "You look good," he said. Tired but good. Dinner smelled the way it always had in that house on special occasions. Roast, rosemary, the yeasty warmth of Denise's dinner rolls, which I will admit were genuinely good. A small, strange betrayal of my own resentment. The table was set with my mother's china, the good set she only used at Christmas. Nobody mentioned that. I noticed it the way I notice everything now, a habit the army gave me that civilian life has never managed to take back. Scan the room. Catalogue the details. Know where the exits are. Denise talked through most of dinner prep about a reasonable, grounded life, about people who build things with their hands and their minds, rather than playing soldier for a paycheck and a pension. She said this while looking at a spot just past my shoulder. Never quite at me. The coward's way of throwing a punch. My father said nothing. Colton smirked into his water glass. I told myself I would let it go. I had faced worse than a woman who resented a stepdaughter she never asked for. Then it was time to sit. Next part coming soon.